We've gotten past page 5. We're now at the top of page 6. Section 3, on line 2, I'd like to make a technical amendment. It should read 16 rather than 15. Page 6, line 2. It's tax year 2016 rather than tax year 2015. We just cut and paste last year's budget. Okay, any objection? Section 4, revenue collections in excess of quarterly collections. This is the usual boilerplate that we've had for the CRER and the dividing or allocating the 12-month. Any objection? Section 4? It's boilerplate. Section 5. Section 5, additional tax credit reimbursement, child tax credit. This is when you used this before? This is the same language from last year's. Section 6, debt service continuing appropriation. We received an update from Gita last week, and these are the numbers for each of these bonds. It's right below it. It's being paid from general fund. It's the funding source. Okay. The new bond is I, but on A, B, any of those, these are the numbers that were provided to us. If memory serves me right, the floating of this new bond last week saved us about $1.8 million in, I think it was $8 million? $8 million in debt service, but we'll be getting it later. But at least for right now, it is lower. And so the grand total right now is 79. But last year we were 81. That's where I got the 1 point. Okay? Senator Blanche, you're looking very pensive.
While we were not going to be able to realize those savings till later on in the year, does this budget reflect, or does this budget identify where if those savings are going to be utilized here, or going to be in a lockbox until later?
It'll be, the hospital is right now.
Right, no, but I'm talking about the savings. Also, you took the save. I see.
It's a debt service, yeah.
Yeah, I understand.
Per year. Okay? And the grand total of debt service is now 79 as opposed to what it used to be of 81 last year, and in the governor's budget request initially had 84.1. Okay. So chapter 1, any Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to address line line 9 on
What
page
page?
7.
Okay.
Guam Department of Education Series 2010A Certificates of Participation. That's for the John F. Kennedy School Project. And in line 13, general fund would be $5,130,600, and the Territorial Education Facilities Fund is 1.568, $1,568,000. And the Department of Education had provided me correspondence that really should be $2,104,446, and the difference is around a little bit more than 500,000. And the reason for that was that the maintenance of JFK has actually increased based on their contractual agreement, and somehow that extra 500,000 would have to be, if we don't include it under TEFF, it will not, it would have to come out of the operations of the other
What was the
schools.
date of your correspondence from them saying that this number is?
This was actually just forwarded to us this morning, and this was based on their examination of the budget.
And this number is the same number that was in the governor's executive budget request in February.
Okay.
If they had said something earlier, we could have tried to find. Unfortunately, this is one of the lines where we adopted what the executive budget request was, and had we known it, we might have been able to try to find some way to do it. Even the Gita debt abstract has it at that amount.
Okay, I just wanted to go on the record.
Okay,
that
thank
had
you.
been
No, I
provided.
appreciate that, because
Yes.
now I know I'm going to have to look at Gita's debt abstract a little closer if they're not getting the amount correctly.
Yes. Thank you, Mr.
It really, those payments should be paid by Department of Administration as part of the pass-through
Yes,
from the
it should-
bond.
Right, it should be, but if it is lacking, it comes out of DOE. So what they would end
It
up,
shouldn't come out of DOE, because this amount isn't coming out of DOE's. Amount is coming from the general fund for the debt that is owed on the lease back agreement on
okay,
on
I'll
JFK.
clarify that
Okay.
with DOE. Thank you.
Okay. Any other issues with the chapter? No, in chapter 1. Ending on page 9. Anyone? Going once? Twice? Thank you very much. Chapter 2, Education. The appropriation for GDOE is $240. Last year it was $237. Senator Underwood?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the increase. And I believe it's, we have increased personnel and operations, total of $3,012,529. But what we have actually also done is increase the per pupil cost for the charter schools for our students who are going there that we believe are also public school students. And so that increase in the per pupil cost, and given the number of students anticipated enrollment, that has amounted to 2,115,000 that would be allotted for the charter schools as a whole. And so actually the difference in their, the total amount is very insignificant in the total budget, given the increase in the per pupil cost for the budget, for the charter schools, which I am not protesting, because I do believe that the charter schools have really made significant progress, and there are a lot of our students are actually enrolling there, and they are public school students. And so I do want to express our appreciation for that. Are we going line by line?
We'll go section by section, yes.
Yeah, okay.
On the appropriation, on those first 15, anybody? Okay. Starting on line 16 with the breakdown, any Senator Argan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have just a general question in regards to the revenues thus far that has been received by the Department of Education. If you can just highlight that, because I do know that a few weeks ago there was a major concern as to whether, in fact, the allotment schedule that was provided by Department of Education at the beginning of this fiscal year was being followed in terms of the remittance of the funds. So just so that we all understand where DOE, I mean, just today, they just opened the school year, and I think they've done a fabulous job to date, despite the challenges for finances. So please, if we can just get an update on that. Thank you.
Yes, and you're very correct. When we had the hearing the other last week, of the 237 that was appropriated to them, they had received 198, and were with about 2 months left, they still had 40,000 that hadn't been received. I'm hoping that they received it before the opening of this, some of it before the opening of this school year. We had in last year's budget included a provision where the reserve was reduced from 15 to 3% in an attempt to try to assist them. That was a good effort on our part. Unfortunately, the cash situation just didn't allow for it, but they are doing an exceptional job of trying to do with what little that they have. But as of a couple of weeks ago when we had the GDOE hearing, they were still short 40 million. And so, I mean, that was a full 6 of their appropriation. And so if we had had additional money, we would have provided more, but this was all that we could at this point provide. But we've addressed everything that they needed to have addressed.
Mr. Chairman, I was just asking to not only highlight the situation and the cash situation with the government of Guam, but really, like you just said, they've done an excellent and an outstanding job in terms of being able to prepare the school. We do know that there are still some shortcomings in terms of recruitment of teachers, certified instructors, but despite that, at least as of today, of which I'm very blessed, several of my grandchildren just started their school, and I haven't received any texts or any complaints. So that I think speaks volumes when you have children attending our public schools. And I just wanted to highlight that they've done a really very good job considering the challenges that they presently face. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, and they've tried very hard to live within the reserve, I mean the amount that was provided to them. I'm hoping that before the end of the fiscal year that they receive the full 237 that we appropriated to them. But we did provide for them, and it was obvious that they could do with very little of an increase, or at least it seemed. Anything else on Section 1 that anybody wants to address? Section 2 is the allocation per student. Yes, Senator Tom Adda.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. On line 6 there, the amount of $6,500 per enrollee at the charter school is mentioned. I somehow recall at the public, I may be wrong, I thought it was $7,000.
OFB went through and it was what they had testified to, that it was about $7,000 per student. DOE did a chart. Why they provided that, I don't know. But it did put us in a real precarious position where we were not providing for our public school students who were in the charter schools. OFB went through and tried to divide it up. The cost per student is different in different schools depending on whether or not it's being leased back or all kinds of other things. But they went through and they did some calculations and came up with $6,500. As I understand it from the chairman of the council and from both charter schools, both are very satisfied with this increase and are very grateful for the increase. Okay. Thank you. Speaker?
Thank you very much. I know that in the way the school system has been, and you're correct, every school is different, anywhere from 4,500 at the time when we were discussing this a couple of years back to 6,500. And I know when they came in with the high end. And the average then actually was at that time 5,500, and the average even for this particular school year is like 6,500. And we have seen how the charter schools are how frugal they are and how they use their monies wisely, and that is one of the intent of having these charter schools. I just want to make sure, and I just want to put it in record, of course, because I know that the academy, the Guam Academy, has entered into a purchase for property, and they're also allowed to do that by law. I only want to make sure that first priority will be given to the instruction of the school children versus the actual use of purchasing and building, unless, of course, it can be replaced with grants, which they're able to do now after demonstrating that they have been functioning for so many years. So I'm really hoping then that, these charter schools would actually go that route to bring in more monies, which could potentially increase then the per pupil cost, even as high as $10,000 per child. So it just really depends on the amounts that they're going after. So, and I want to thank you as well for taking that into consideration, for raising, their per pupil costs. I would also then send a strong message to DOE that you can't just, go and say that this, potentially, this is what, you're making this the average because this is what you're reaching for and requesting for, because it's not as realistic considering what our situation is today. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
But simple math going into the 65 times 31,000 students is less than that. So they're above that average if you just take it just straight off the top. So, okay, section 2. Senator Underwood.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to, again, go on the record on behalf of Department of Education I had just received, just about a minute ago while you were talking, correspondence from them, and I'm not sure whether I should just enter this on the record, but they had some concerns, had expressed some concerns about the per pupil cost and for the charter schools and the increase, and how that is somehow going to, again, put a strain in their operational costs as a whole. It's kind of hard for me right now to decipher all of this because they have actually just, but could I just have this printed out and then passed on to you?
It'll be, you can enter it into the journal for the day.
Okay, all right,
Okay?
thank
No,
you.
I mean, as I keep trying to explain, these are public school students, and
Yes.
as much as GDOE tries to disavow them, they are public school kids. Or at least that's what we had when we
Yes.
created this, so.
Yes, I agree with you. Okay.
And they were the ones that opened the door with their presentation at their hearing. It wasn't,
All right. Okay.
okay. Section 3. For the Chamorro studies. Madam Speaker? Okay, same as last year's. Section 4, Limited Gaming Fund. Anybody? Senator Morrison? Okay. Oh, you want to come back, you want to go back to 5? I'm sorry. We're at 4 with limited gaming. Anybody on limited gaming? Section 5, GDOE miscellaneous healthy future fund allocations. Did I understand, Senator Ender, would you wish to address that?
Okay. Mr. Chairman, in line 8, page 12, under A, Interscholastic Sports Fund, 1, the sum of 520. I have the written. Could I make a copy of
Please.
this and just make it available for everyone now, or do you want me to
No.
read it?
Go ahead.
Just a short break so everyone can read along.
All right, we'll take a short recess. Okay. As I understand it, we've resolved the issue in A, and there'll be no amendment to 1 and 2A unless someone has a line that they wish to strike. Senator Tom Abbott.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think, so we're going to restore the amounts, but I think that the amendment that should be made is on the last line of A2. It's just to delete the sentence "to the maximum extent practicable, GDOE shall contract busing services." And one could interpret that then they have to get their busing services from the private sector. Then we get into procurement issues. If we remove that, then they could just as easily get into a MOA with DPW to transfer funds so that they can provide services.
Okay, so the amendment is to strike on line 21 and 22 the sentence starting with 2 and ending with programs. That's the ADA amendment. Is there any objection to that? Any objection? Health and physical activities, physical education activities. Senator Morrison, anything you want to add to that? All right, B, Section 6, y cuéntense la principal.
Thank you. The schools that are listed, of course, are identical to last year, and I'm just wondering if there are any others that may have dropped. And have we verified those numbers, other than the 12 listed here?
I didn't receive anything, but if the oversight chair received anything of that, I don't.
But should
And
there-
they've looked at this very carefully.
Oh,
I
they
mean,
did
they
too?
wanted to make that amendment in A, so I'm sure they would have seen this one if
Right.
if
But
there was going to be.
if by chance we do find out, then we
I will allow us
Okay,
to come
thank
back
you
to
then.
it, but
All right.
you can call them and ask them. Okay? Yes? Senator Blas, then Senator Ada.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Section 6, and I think very simply, what is this? I know we've had this in previous budgets, Ken, but maybe if I can ask the oversight chairs.
Thank you very much for that question. What this actually would mean is that, I'm so sorry. What this lapit principat is that for school administrators to actually use these monies for minor maintenance and repairs of their schools, minor things that they're going to need that normally are not done by, but could have been done by the maintenance division, but because they're so minor that sometimes they need to purchase a bulb or maybe a plunger or what have you, that they can immediately access these monies to take care of the immediate maintenance needs of their schools.
Recognizing that, Mr. Chair, and I'm looking at, I guess, some of the exceptions with some of the schools. We do have 4 schools that are still under lease, which includes...
In the elementary?
Yeah, for the lease schools, that's everything is being taken care of by the lessor.
But they're getting the money. But they're getting the same amount?
Oh, no, they're not, because all of everything should be addressed. If there's a light bulb that's off, immediately the lessor would step right in to address their immediate needs.
I do recall in the education budget that those schools were getting, or there were allocations from those schools.
From this account? I don't believe so. Speak into the microphone, please, Madam Speaker.
No, we never did. I mean, because this was actually an amendment that I put in every year, and now it's automatic, and it always is for the other schools other than the lease schools.
Anything further, Senator Blas?
While we're going through that, I'll just go ahead and do the verification on that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Tom Atta, I see your hand up? No? Okay, well then, I will put a bookmark here for the verification of the list. Okay?
Mr. Chair, if I could just ask perhaps the oversight chair of education on this particular one, as I'm reading it, and now that I understand what it's for, just to clarify, all schools with enrollments of 500 students or greater will be based upon $30 a student. Is that how this works? And then those who have less than 500 students then get a minimum of $15,000. I'm not sure I understand the logic in that, because say, for example, a school has 400 students, and just top of my head, right, if they get $15,000, they only have 400 students, then their per student take is, I think, around 37. So it would be a higher number per student. It would seem to me that the more students you have, the more wear and tear and the more needs you would have. So if somebody could just explain the logic in that to me, I would appreciate it.
Well, this is when we first brought this up to DOE, and we realized that rather than do $30 for the smaller schools, some schools were at 200. Some were, at one time, we had a school population only of 83, 87 students. And if we gave them only $30 per child, they would only get like $2,000, $3,000. And so we figured that then the best thing is that if we can base it on 500 and below, because there were 12 schools that were below that number, they would get far less. Like even a 400 student population would only get $12,000. So therefore, just saying below that amount, that there's that threshold, then that you get $15,000 regardless whether you have 83 students or 400 students, you'll get $15,000. That school would get $15,000.
Mr. Chair, this is bookmark, right? Only because I still don't understand that logic. You have a smaller school with a lesser population, you would have lesser needs, I would imagine, or at least I would imagine less wear and tear. Whereas if you have a big student population, you probably have greater needs with more wear and tear, and yet they receive less per student. And I'm just, it's just one of those things top of my mind.
I think one of the things that has to be considered is that the bigger schools that have the leasehold or lease back, they have a contract. And as I understood from the hearing, some of the schools are thinking about having a part-time custodian that is on campus to address needs or something to assist if they don't have a contract to take care of the maintenance costs in their schools. I really don't understand this. But that was what we've done over the last couple of years, and I will leave a bookmark so that those of you, and I guess I should probably educate myself on this one myself.
But if you consider this, let's say, because my school at one time was 1,500 students, times 30, that's $45,000 versus, but there's still basic kind of stuff that all schools, will need. And so that was the reason for basing it by population.
Okay. Senator?
I just wanted to raise the point that, we do have some large schools that are not leaseholds or leasebacks. Like Benevente Middle School is a large middle school that really needs a ton of resources, And perhaps what we can consider, and I'm glad we're bookmarking it, is maybe the leaseback schools could be exempt or excluded from the Salapi Principat.
They aren't getting, they are exempt already.
Okay, so then this is for...
This is only for the schools that, just the...
Yeah, Benevente is not a leaseback school. Yeah. And then there's other factors to consider as well, like for example, socioeconomic status of the student population, and every school sends home that list of supplies, But the reality, I was getting messages over the weekend asking me, Senator, is there anywhere we can go to get help with supplies because, we can't afford them, and this Salapi Principat can help with school supplies. But perhaps it should be allocated based on the socioeconomic status of the students, based on maybe a formula of free and reduced meals times population. It is worthy of some reconsideration rather than some kind of formula that was based on perhaps needs that were existent in the past that have changed today. So I do appreciate the bookmarking of this section, and we should put more thought into maybe how the allocation should be spread out.
Okay.
Well, it doesn't really matter to me what type of formula we're going to use, but the only thing is I'm saying now, the bottom line is we only have $1 million at 81, $1,081,081 to divvy up between, all of the schools. So however way you decide, I'm fine with it. It'll be equal to everyone. It just means I don't want the smaller schools to get a lot less, like $2,000 or $8,000, because now we're going to give it to all of the other bigger schools.
I understand your concern, but I also understand the concerns of the ones with the larger schools. And so I'll leave a bookmark here, and we'll figure it out, and you guys can talk amongst later when you verify with the school principals of those various schools. Senator Rangan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I think we really need to revert back to the original objective behind the establishment of the Iquentan Salapi Principat. The purpose of the establishment of this particular provision back in the 24th Guam Legislature was specifically because at that time the school administrators / many of our teachers were taking money directly out of their own personal pockets to be able to procure supplies and materials for daily operations of the schools. So that's when this concept was conceived, and the intent was to make sure that the school administrator has access to a petty cash, being accountable and responsible and providing the reporting mechanisms, whatever the requirements will be, but they expend it specifically to be able to address some of these shortcomings on a daily basis that they experience. Mr. Chairman, just last week, I was approached by a couple of teachers that said they had to procure a whole box load of supplies and materials because they did not have it for their students. This is what this fund was established for, is to be able to make sure that the school administrators and the teachers have some resources until all these procurement processes and being able to go through the Department of Education and procuring these other supplies and materials. And what's interesting, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, is that even when this idea was conceived, It even came down to purchasing toilet tissue for the latrines. That's what the purpose of the establishment of this fund was for. So I would discourage, please, our colleagues to take away from that premise. If you want to redefine it in terms of how schools get their allocation, that's fine. But it is a petty cash with responsibility and accountability of how it's expended. But it's a petty cash so that the school administrators can support our teachers in the classrooms to get items that they otherwise were not able to have on stock, whether it's toilet tissue, whether it's an eraser, whether it's pencils, whether it's pens, whatever the requirement is, at least there would be this immediate financial support. Albeit $15,000 for a small school is not a lot, but it's $15,000 that otherwise would not come out of the pocketbooks of our school administrators, as well as our custodians, as well as our school teachers in the classrooms. So I wanted to add how this fund was originally established and the purpose behind it, because it was an outcry by many of our school administrators and teachers at that time. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Just a note on that, then, with that explanation, I think it gives strength to the concern that I have, because if it was really for those purposes that the previous speaker had stated, then the larger schools have greater needs. And so for them to get less per student versus a small school, it seemed to be inequitable.
Here, and that comes out to 31,000. Divide that into that, what's the number?
Medical, which about authorizing 2016-18.
They got 30 per student. Okay, we'll take a short recess. I'm going to bookmark Section 6 in whatever amendment you guys come up with, we'll address at that point. Section 6, the 1.5 for the books allocation.
I just want to reiterate, of course, a statement that DOE has made, and I know many times when we say that we've appropriated the $1.5 million for the purchase of textbooks, that when you look at this day and age, it's not really all textbooks, that there are actually e-books and other collateral materials, and that normally, are being purchased. And the argument has always been is that they're saying, well, every child should have a textbook to take home, but not every teacher has or would allow students maybe even to take it home. They would have class sets that will be kept in the classrooms. And then there are other sets of resource textbooks and other textbooks that may have recently gone off the adopted list that will remain, or at least the instruction was at the time was there, that will remain in the schools for a number of years before they're actually sent down to be surveyed, so that those books will continue to be used until either such time that the year comes up for the adoption of a particular discipline, then that's when eventually then those books would be sent out to be surveyed. But there should always be, I'm not the superintendent, I don't go around and check. I used to, as the former chair, to actually visit the schools and would find hundreds of brand new textbooks stored in closets with that's cockroach and termite infested, brand new. And you've seen it all, and the media has posted this as well, at the old warehouse, mountain high of textbooks that had been rained on and destroyed, brand new textbooks. So I hope then that we do realize that it is not just for the physical textbook, but there's actually e-book readers. There are other collateral materials, other instructional materials. There are musical materials, software, and all of that should be made available to our children. We're saying we want them to be computer literate, and yet, we're not moving in that direction to help them in purchasing some of these instructional materials.
And that's the allocation of an amount that could be used for that, okay? Section 7, anything? Section 8. Just directs when all of these things are supposed to be done and informing us of anything on Section 8. No. 7 was an allocation. They may allocate for that. And Section 8 is an appropriation. Yes. Okay. Section 8, anything? Section 8. Section 9. Senator Underwood. Senator Torres. Anybody? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, just a point of clarification. Section 9 appropriates $100,000 to the First Generation Trust Fund initiative. I just want clarification because in other sections of the bill, budget bill, there's also an appropriation from UOG of $100,000 and from GCC of $200,000. So what is the actual fund what is the actual total amount that's being appropriated to this First Generation Trust Fund initiative? Is it the total of those three?
Yes.
And that's the breakdown that we decided. Okay, I just wanted clarification. So it's
Yes.
$400,000 annually, correct?
Coming from those three different
things.
institutions.
Okay, all right. Just that's all I wanted to
Allocated
clarify.
from those three institutions.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Section 9. Anything else? Section 10, JROTC Fund. Section 10. Section 11, Summer School Fund. Where they have to set aside money for the summer school. Goes on to page 16 up to line 10. Anything on the summer school fund? Section 12, website posting. Okay. Section 13, reports from the superintendent. Fourteen, utilities reduction incentives. Senator, Madam Speaker, I'm important.
Thank you very much. This would actually would normally apply, I guess, to the other schools at one time, but because of the 4 lease schools right now, they're actually moving towards solar energy, and in that particular legislation, though, it was to be that the monies are to be used for now some maintenance monies now that can go into the schools. So can I ask for a bookmark for this, not pull out the actual language in that legislation that deals with utility reduction, so to make sure that it is the same as the existing law?
Will do.
Thank you.
So section 14 is bookmarked. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I know we're bookmarked. Maybe when the speaker comes back with information, she can also get this information. Is how our schools, do they do their own power? Are they all, it's separate meters, but do they? So how is this, how do you capture what is saved?
They all have separate meters. This was my understanding for the lease schools. So then the department already has a dollar amount that they've been paying every month for each one of those schools. So when they see the reduction, then what happens is that those monies what the department would do is to then put it back into those individual schools. Their savings will go right back into the school.
So the savings, if any of the schools, it's a matter of them
Whether it's
turning off
air cons, you're right.
But the source of power, it's not up to that school on how they would, as you said, if that school wanted to go solar, then it's not up to that school. It's up to the main, it's up to DOE, right?
There's 2. One would be the main, which right now a law has been passed to start that. There's a stumbling block, which I had to introduce. I just recently introduced legislation to address that situation. For the lease schools, they were able to do this on their own without permission, so to speak, from the superintendent or from the government, because they currently are the owners of those facilities. So they're moving forward with those 4 schools, and they themselves have also indicated a savings for the schools, which now then will go right back into the school.
Okay. Is that satisfactory? Senator Nicholas?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The dialogue does raise an interesting question, though, with respect to how this particular section is written, because if it's 15% of the school's prior annual billing, is that just the dollar amount, or is it the kilowatt hour? Because technically speaking, year over year, our school's billings have dropped by more than 15% based on our cost per kilowatt hour. And if it's by the billing, and if it's on the dollar amount, then they should be getting their difference. If it's by the kilowatt hour consumption, then that raises an interesting question with respect to the previous conversation, because assuming we have schools going solar, reducing the billing costs, that doesn't necessarily result in reduced kilowatt hour consumption. So we need to really, I think, clarify what we mean by billing. Do we mean kilowatt hours, or do we mean dollars? Because I would proffer that if it's dollars, they should have been given supplemental over the last year. And if it's kilowatt hours, then we need to make that clear in our alternative energy policies that we're going to be adopting for the schools, and how those things measure up to these kind of provisions.
Okay. I'm not a power person, so I will bookmark it and allow those of you that have been working on this issue to try to figure out how we clarify that, right? So 14 is bookmarked. 15, the transfer authority given to the superintendent. Any objections to it or any comments? Section 16, the cost savings incentive.
You know, Mr. Chairman, is that I know this has always been there, and I really don't even know whether there's been a real push maybe to actually implement some of these things so that there will be that incentive, because the examples that we put here is exactly what could be done, like maximizing on student-teacher ratios, you know, and practicing energy conservation, you know, in different types of programs. So all those are so doable, and but honestly, I don't know. Somebody told me that if somebody ever did this, you're going to eat your hat or your sock. If this is actually ever really happens. So I don't know, maybe now might be the time to really look at it. I will give credit. I'll tell you this, and it was one of our members was a former superintendent. When we went through line item by line item, we saw in their master scheduling that there were classes that were way below almost half the minimum or the maximum number, to consolidate some of those classes so that you can have, you know, like possibly, you know, 2 grades, but I don't know. No action was taken, I guess, to either reward the superintendent or the teachers or their school principal who actually implemented this. But this is an example, very easy to do.
And do you want to leave it in, or do you want to take it out? If you want to leave it in, do you want to try?
We need to leave it in, and this was actually done, Mr. Chairman and Madam Speaker. There was cross-leveling that had occurred, and there were savings that were realized. And of course, with DOE, their operational costs are just astronomical. That just gets absorbed. Whatever you save just gets eaten up by the operation. So yes, they have done this, and I'm not sure how this is being done within this past year, but we have cross-leveled and have maximized the classrooms, the student-teacher ratios, and consolidated programs, and also practice the energy conservation.
And the incentive is on the last 2 lines.
Yes, right there. For payment of the prior year obligations and the purchase of supplies and materials, which has been done.
Okay.
Yes.
All right,
let's
so
keep it.
there's no objection to 16.
No.
Okay. 17, local fund reimbursement. Needs to be there. 18, prior year obligations. Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to have this conversation in light of the allotment realities that the department is facing today, and the possibility that it may close out the fiscal year not receiving its full allotment, even when you add back its reserve. And so what we're basically going to be doing with this section is we're authorizing the payment of those prior year obligations, which would be whatever those lapses are in terms of the lapsed unpaid encumbrances. But do we have an idea of how much that could potentially be, and then how much that's going to potentially impact this coming fiscal year? Because it's the accrual of these payables these prior years that just get stacked up over time, that eventually make us fall back more and more every fiscal year, and then we get to the point where we say we got to borrow, otherwise we're not going to be able to pay, so and so vendor. So, is blanket authorization for this appropriate, or should we have some, or should we address the prior year obligations when they're brought before the body, so that we can fully measure the impact it's having on the current fiscal year, rather than just allowing it to impact the fiscal year at an unquantified amount? I know their allotment schedule is pretty substantial right now. How much they're behind.
Mm-hmm.
And did you want to contribute to this discussion, Senator Espaldon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I was going to let the previous speaker just keep on down the line, but this is along the lines that I addressed when we first started this whole process. That when we go down this line of allowing a certain department to use their 2017 budget to pay for past year's obligations, it seems to me that going forward, by the end of fiscal 2017, we're going to be running a deficit then. And the previous speaker was correct. Then what? Are we going to be forced into taking action, going out in the bond market to borrow again and things like that? And I'm not really sure what the resolution to that would be. I mean, either it seems to me, just top of my head, it almost undo the concept that you were implementing in terms of trying to figure out what the projection revenues should be, and then budget that way. But it seems that if we don't add this in, then we're still going to have a deficit and unbalanced budget, because we don't know what those expenses are. And so come the third, fourth quarter of next fiscal year, we're going to be running a deficit again. And I don't have an immediate solution right here, right now. It's one of those things I think we need to understand. So I was going to let the previous speaker, if he has any proposals, I'd be willing to hear them.
As I understand it, I'm not sure which member, but I thought there was a member that was trying to deal with prior year obligations. Senator Uggan, yes, of some kind of legislation that would take into account the big picture of this whole thing, if my understanding. No, but I thought, Senator Rodriguez, did you have a prior year obligation bill that was all-encompassing? I thought there was a discussion at a public hearing about a prior year obligation bill that would somehow address some of these things. It was promise compensation. I'm sorry.
So,
okay.
Mr. Chairman, just if we allow these carryovers to impact future fiscal years, we won't, as the retiring speaker said, we won't have a handle over its true impact until we're already told that we're in a deficit or that we're short. If we require the agencies to come back to this body and say, we have a prior year obligation and we need X millions of dollars to cover it, that would force us to stop looking at revenue projections that are tracking higher and thinking that those are monies to be appropriated for other areas, and it'll force us to say, hey, you know what, we're tracking higher here, let's pull from there to pay the prior year obligation. Because what's happening right now is these prior year obligations are getting carried forward into the fiscal year. It's impacting us towards the end of the fiscal year. And throughout the fiscal year, because we didn't have a figure for that, we're seeing projections in certain object categories that are higher, and we're assuming we can appropriate them for other things, when really they probably should have been used to pay down those prior year obligations if we were booking them up front. So I understand that the intent of this authorization is to give as much flexibility to management in order to be able to meet their needs. But what it does is it fogs the room in terms of our ability to clearly see what our true financial picture is in terms of what we owe versus what we have available. So perhaps we need to come to terms with the fact that prior year obligations should be brought before this body and made very, very clear, rather than kind of getting washed into the next fiscal year.
Okay, there's going to be a couple of these. Can I bookmark this, and then let's have just one discussion on all of those? Because one of the problems that we're going to have is the large sum that GDOE is carrying forward. It will completely mess us up next year. And in GCC and UOG, the amounts that we're going to be seeing with them, I mean, when they told us at their public hearing that GCC wasn't fully paid for 15 until March of 16, and I don't know where that money's going to come from, and it's cash. And the way that they do these closeouts, I don't understand how we can leave these things open. I'm not an accountant, and so I just can't believe that we're making adjustments in March, April, and May. I would have thought that by March, the audit would have been completed and all the everything had to have been taken care of by then. You can't wait until June to make a reconciliation for something that happened the previous June. It boggles my mind, it doesn't make sense to me. But I'll try to talk to accountants and try to figure out how we can address this. So this prior year obligation provision, I will discuss with the accountants that I have on staff on how we can address that. Okay?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
May I just make a point here as we're considering this? I know. This really, as everyone knows, for DOE as large as it is, this really helps with keeping the operations going. So if you have a contractor, if you're contracting maintenance of facilities, the custodial services, and you have prior year obligations and you have not paid that and you're not ready to pay it, then there is a possibility that those services are just going to be stopped. So as we do this, we need to work with DOE, that largest agency, to ensure that they're prepared with whatever it is. I don't know how much they have for prior year obligations that keeps getting rolled over. I do know that it's a matter of convenience. Tolling, the fiscal manager, has really been very upfront that this has helped with the management of cash and keeping the services going. Given the shortages, the short allotments, cash allotments that have been released to them. So I just want to express that, and I'm all for making sure that we know how much we actually have on the books and to do this in an orderly fashion. But please, let's get DOE involved if we are really going to take steps.
I was hoping that you would, all of you that have contacts at all three institutions, would contact them and determine what the impact would be so that we can make an informed decision on how we address this. Okay? So I'll leave it bookmarked. Section 19, BBMR exemption.
I just want to thank you for putting this in, because DOE is a little bit different from GCC or UOG, and I think it's very fair that then we're telling them to go ahead and submit their drawdown schedule prior to October 31st, and failure to do so, and shame on them if they don't, is that then they would fall under the allotment schedule by BBMR. And so I think that this is a really good section that we're providing here for DOE. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I just want everybody to recognize this openly, is that though BBMR may not be holding up their allotments and they may release it, that doesn't mean the Department of Administration is releasing the cash. So I'm just being upfront with you. That's what we were told at the hearing, was that BBMR is not holding it, but there is no cash to be released by DOA, so it's not coming. But that's where the issues are at. Okay. Except for the bookmark on 18, the bookmark on 14, and the bookmark on 6. Is that correct? In this chapter, we have 3 bookmarks. Senator Ada.
Well, I'm looking at section 19, and with that comment that you made, that maybe we really need to put language in there that makes it very clear that, yeah, we're exempting them from that release control, but that really doesn't mean anything, because unless it gets by DOA, all this is just, I mean, it's kind of like blowing smoke.
Yes, it really is. Cash is king, and so though BBMR can say, I've released it, they're like this.
I know. So, Mr. Chairman, I really, just to avoid that confusion, I would move to just delete section 19. It doesn't really mean anything. All it does is it sets up then the other guy so that now DOE gets caught in the middle, because, now he doesn't have to worry about BBMR, but we have set up now we just thrown DOA under the bus.
Well, it means that they only have to try to schmooze up to one director as opposed to two. Okay. I realize that it's optics. It's just, but they feel good about it, and they think that it gives them additional power. But the release is out there, but the cash isn't there, unfortunately. Okay.
All right, then never mind.
Okay. Thank you. So, except for those 3 bookmarks, the chapter 1. Six, 14, and 18. Okay? Otherwise, that chapter is closed. All right? Thank you. University of Guam. Madam Chair, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, I have to say, Mr. Vice Speaker, I have to say that I'm very proud of UOG and GCC, that they have really held, of course, their institution, in terms of their budget request. And I know that with UOG in particular, they have just a very slight, increase in their operations of only $59,000. So I just want to send kudos to the president and his fiscal people. And thank you as well for, recognizing that in the public hearing.
Okay. So, Section 1 on legislative intent. Senator Uggan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to add to the comment of the oversight chair of the University of Guam, Mr. Chairman, I think it's very notable that we should recognize also the president and all of his personnel at University of Guam for acquiring an 8-year accreditation timeframe. So, I mean, that's reflective not only of their cash management ability, but it's also reflective of making sure that they provide the best and optimum education for our people. So I also wanted to add to the oversight chair's comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, so Section 1. Section 2, the appropriations for operations of $30,740,431. Federal matching, $4,819,717. Appropriations for the UOG scholarship and training programs, $3,599,358. Section 4, appropriations for the Aquaculture Development and Training Center of $125,254. Section 5, appropriation for WERI, for the hydrologic study. This is $182,694. Appropriation for Weary's Comprehensive Water Resource Monitoring Program of $155,626. Appropriation to the University of Guam for the Northern and Southern Soil and Water Conservation District Program of $149,384, of which the, yes, and authorizes the use of it as matching for for federal grant. Okay. Appropriation to a pass-through to KPRG for 125. Yes.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I notice in many of the sections here, we make reference to the fact that these funds could be used as for use as a local matching requirement for federal grants and aid. And I'm wondering if, for example, somebody like KPRG, I don't know, maybe there's maybe there's the National Public Radio organization that provides grants to organizations like KPRG. So I'm wondering, like, for example, on line 8 there, by being specific that you can only use it for federal grants and aid, kind of precludes then the possibility of using this as a matching for any other grants and aid from the Rockefeller Foundation or whatever.
A very good point. That for some of these, that it shouldn't just be for matching grants and aid, federal, but if there are endowment foundations.
So for Section 8 then, on line 8, I would move to strike the word federal and just leave it as a general grants and aid.
As I understand it from the staff, there has to be specific authorization to use it for the federal grants and aid, but there is no need for authorization to use it for foundation grants. They could be using it for foundation grants already without our authorization as part of their operations, because I assure you KPRG is not running on $125,000.
Right. So by putting in that they can use it for federal grant, it doesn't limit them to just that.
It just authorizes it for that purpose, so that when they apply for the federal grant, they can say as their local fund matching, they're putting $40,000.
I see. Okay,
and
fine.
they can use the AD to apply for Rockefeller or for.
Okay, fine. So I withdraw then that
Okay.
motion. Thank you.
Mr.
All right.
Chairman, can
Yes.
I just add, though, that, for every one of these, if you really look at them, they are at status quo. I know that for KPRG, it went up from 89,000 to 125. But then, as you indicated before, that we've adopted on page 20 on the federal grants, matching grants, they were at 2.3 million, and there's an increase of 4.8 million. Hence, of course, the need to put all of these appropriations for the federal grants and aid that could be used as local matching.
Thank you. Okay, so Section 8 on KPRG. Okay. Guampedia 200. Senator Espaldon.
Mr. Chair, again, this section contains the same language that was brought up in previous sections. In line 13, you have this appropriation shall continue to be available until expended. And again, the same issue arises in terms of, I guess the first question would be, do we know how much of fiscal 2016 appropriation of $200,000 has been received by Guampedia?
With all of the pass-throughs that we're using TAF, unfortunately, there's been a slowdown of releases from GVB because there's been a slowdown of release from DOA. And so consequently, we'll probably end the fiscal year with a lot of the pass-throughs not having received their full amount because DOA has not released all of the 40 million that was TAF money.
And I understand, Mr. Chair. And again, I just want to reiterate the point.
Yeah.
That we're passing this budget knowing full well that we could possibly be running a deficit as we allow continuing these appropriations to be to continue to be available until they're expended. I believe that's the same language in 2016
It's
budget.
not so much TAF. These are TAF monies, especially in this one.
Okay.
That money was received already and
Just hasn't been.
unfortunately has been part of the pot and is being diverted elsewhere
Okay.
currently.
No, thank you. And again, it's just the fiscal impact altogether.
Okay. No, I agree, but
Thank you.
thank you. So Guampedia, UOG Capital Improvement Fund, 500,000.
Mr. Chairman?
From higher fund. Senator Espaldon, this is the one. Senator Agan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a quick question. I know that the initial legislation that was authorizing the use of the Guam Highway Fund specifically for procuring additional funds and borrowing money for the capital improvement projects at the University of Guam provided for a continuing appropriation provision. So is this particular section necessary to be provided here in the budget? Because it's like a regurgitation.
Yes. I don't,
Because I was under the impression that the original legislation that authorized the use of this fund specifically by University of Guam was, it provided for a continuing appropriation because on an annualized basis, that funding source was identified to pay that debt.
but it's not here. It isn't in the list that was given to us by Gita. That's why we put it here, to
Okay.
make sure that it's provided for.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And that was for the School of Business. Anything further on 10? On 11, the UOG Capital Improvement Appropriation. These are pursuant to two public laws. The building of the new School of Engineering and the Student Center. Okay? The Cancer Trust Fund, that's a percentage of the Healthy Futures Fund on Section 12. Okay? Section 12. Senator?
I just wanted some clarification in looking at page 24, section 12, which is on line 1, and then jumping ahead to another section of the law. There's appropriations to this Guam Cancer Trust Fund to the University of Guam, and I'm wondering if, and maybe the question should be asked later. There's an appropriation in another budget for the Department of Public Health Department of Public Health and Social Services to UOG, and I'm just wondering whether it's smarter to just lump the two or whether there is a pass-through that's required for some reason.
There are two different things. One is the Cancer Trust Fund, and the other one is the Cancer Registry. The university does a study, and everyone who passes because of cancer, they've been accumulating a registry for about, I'd say at least the last 15 years to try to figure out and determine what kinds of cancers we are dying from and to try to help with the research.
No, I get that, but you know, I'm just looking at, and I guess it's perhaps two different things and two different functions, but it just seems odd that in another section it's almost a pass-through from an agency that's entrusted or mandated to perform that function, to have another type of agreement or MOU with another agency. It's just a strange way of applying funds to pretty much the same thing, because they still do deal with the same sections, maybe the same title of GCA.
No.
Let me just ask a question when we get further, because I think
Okay.
I'm confused. I'm muddling the issue.
But on this one, this was specific in the Healthy Futures Fund for the Cancer
This one I
Trust me.
have I have no concern with the way this one is laid out. I just had a question about how another part.
Yeah, the university has a group that oversees who gets how much of this money. They handle the accounting and the distribution and the audit of the expenditures.
I guess I'll ask the question again when we get to that section later
Okay.
on. Yeah, it'll be a little
Okay.
clearer. Thank you.
So section 12. Section 13, the allocation for the First Generation Trust Fund of $250 from you believe you had asked that question earlier. And it's the cumulative total of the three agencies. Anybody? No? The program revenue and expenditure report. '15 program annual report by the President. Of the various programs that he has in receipt of these pass-throughs. Anyone? Section 16, the scholarship, financial assistance, and other reports by the university. Reporting requirements. Transfer authority for the University of Guam. Senator Espaldon, this is another one.
Yes, and you're talking about Section 18 now, though, right?
Yes.
Yes, and again, I just want to make note that this is one of those continuing appropriations that you had said perhaps your team will try to
Right.
figure out how to resolve.
Yes, and so I'll bookmark this
Thank you.
so that we'll address all three.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know what they did receive and how much perhaps they're behind. I'm sorry? I'm getting all kinds of responses. Maybe somebody here knows what that answer is, but, one of our colleagues seems to know the answer.
On which one?
On what specifically UOG, how much has been received of the fiscal 2016 appropriation to date? Well, I
How
mean,
much
because
they
when you start
received?
talking about continuing appropriations, right, again, the point that I've been making throughout has been that if we allow that to happen, then of course we will fall short in terms of the amount that we budget in terms for operations, because they're going to be able to use money or those appropriations that there was no cash behind, and we carry it forward. Then instead of giving them $100, we're really giving $110, and that's unaccounted for in this budget, at least in real numbers. And so the difficulty I have is that in the end, we're still going to be running a deficit no matter what we call this budget, balanced or not, right? And again, I'm just trying to understand.
I can provide you with an update on that. I thought the last I heard it was something along 13. I mean, it was almost half their appropriation hadn't been received.
Half of it has not been
Almost.
received.
It's a
right?
Yeah.
Right. So again, and this will be added on to what you said. The team will probably try to figure out how that we can resolve. Mr.
Yes.
Chair. Thank you.
And Section 18 also I'll bookmark so that we can discuss this on the continuing appropriation.
Thank you.
Okay? Because I know you have an issue with that. Senator Uggan, then Senator Nicholas.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just a question. Did I understand you correctly that all of the appropriations for the prior fiscal year 15, was remitted in December of last year?
For the university, yes.
For the University of Guam. So they were zeroed out in terms of the carryover obligation.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Their 15 appropriation wasn't completely received until the end of December of 2015.
Understood, but they received the entire allocation. So that was
according to them, yes, they finally received everything by December. For
Thank you, Mr.
GCC,
Chair.
it was everything by March. Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But again, just to clarify, I mean, was that just a renaming of the book entry where it was actually supposed to be their 2016 money, but they just gave it to them and said this is for 2015? And because that's the kind of practice that's creating our current cash issues, And the other question that I wanted to bring up also is, because these are continuing appropriations, does that mean then that if they do not receive it and the fiscal year lapses, they have a balance that's due from us on top of what we are appropriating for this fiscal year?
From us, you mean the legislature or the government of Guam?
Like, for example, if we appropriated $40 million, they only receive 30, and then we appropriate another 40, that means that they have a balance due of 50.
50, yes.
Right.
And that's the way I understand their MOU with BBMR is they recognize that the 10 was from last year, that they'll be receiving with money from this year. And then we'll see how much money is carried forward into 18.
And then it just becomes an operative problem, because then if we're paying that 10 with current revenue, then what are we shortchanging with the current revenue?
Current revenue, you're shorting by 10. Unfortunately.
If they have 100% of their FY2017 allotment,
yeah,
plus the 10, then we're shorting somewhere else. So I mean, I agree with the retiring speaker. This practice just creates a very difficult cash management situation.
But if we were to cut it off, it would be like saying, tough, the end of the year got here, you didn't receive your money, thanks for saving us $10 million last year. The legislature said you can't carry it forward. We know that we actually owe you the 10 from last year and the 40 from this year, but we're only going to give you the 40 from this year and write off the 10 from last year.
But the difference will be that if they had encumbrances, those would still be prior year obligations that we would still need to pay. So
yes.
Even if their appropriation amount ceased at the end of the fiscal year, those prior year obligations, whatever's encumbered, would still be owed regardless of whether or not
Correct.
their continuing appropriation was
But
discontinued.
and I think almost all of that was actually encumbered. It's just that they hadn't received the cash. Because they paid all of the bills, they paid all of the salaries, they paid all of the contracts, and only because they've been frugal and had some savings were they able to make those payments. And then they're just saying, we don't have enough cash to give you, and we'll start giving you some money when we get cash in October. But it really was money from June that you're going to start be receiving in October.
Right. I would as an operative way of doing it, I would prefer that we just get a notice saying that this is what we owe for the prior year, versus just kind of leaving the checkbook open and not knowing whether the checks are being written for this year or for last year. Something for the committee to, I guess, report back to us on.
No, I'm trying to figure out an analogy. It's like putting it on your credit card, and you're paying it with next year's salary, but you had encumbered it in the last year, but you're carrying it forward on your credit card because you didn't have enough income during that year. You put groceries on the credit card.
Well, it's a little different though. This language is that because it's a continuing appropriation, even if there is no encumbrance, they still get the full amount. And so if they were able to somehow operationally make it through the end of the fiscal year without needing that amount, they're still entitled to it because they're still continuously appropriated it. So there is a slight nuance in the difference between the encumbrance and the appropriation. So I would like I would like some guidance on how to move forward from here.
Okay, we'll work on that this evening. For everybody's information, UOG is still awaiting $20.9 million in cash for 16, and GCC is waiting on $10 million in cash for 16, which is almost half the appropriation that we gave both of them. And this is as of today.
Do we have an idea of what their encumbrances are?
No, I'm sorry. But I'm just saying that's...
Well, I appreciate that information, Mr. Chairman, which actually goes back to page 1 in terms of the conservative nature of this budget, because if we do seem to start tracking higher than what we are projecting through this budget and more in line with the governor, it seemed to me that we'd be able to use those funds to take care of those kind of debt.
If we could collect it.
If we could collect it.
Yes.
Well, I mean, just on that last statement too, Mr. Chairman, you know, if they're short 20.9 million of what we have appropriated them in this current fiscal year, and we're assuming that 20.9 million is going to be there this time next year, are we putting ourselves in a position where using this fiscal year's projected revenues to create the projections for next fiscal year might be very misaligned with what the actual cash realities are, and is even this conservative budget very optimistic given the actual cash realities?
I think I admitted that in the beginning, that even last year when we're seeing it this year, that even what we thought was a conservative budget last year is not being realized in cash. And I'm trying as much as possible in the proposal that I've set forward to try to use more realistic numbers, and hoping that by the end of 17 we'll have collected everything that we said we were going to collect under this conservative projection. And if there's anything more, then we can deal with those collections. Then we'll have them for appropriations for something else, for other things. But right now, I just don't want us to say that we have $60 million more and don't have the collections. So we just commit and increase the university's appropriation to 50, and they'll end up at the end of the next year being owed 30.
Because if I recall in the opening statement of the oversight chair, the university was asking for $59,000 more this fiscal year than last fiscal year. But if it's $59,000 more with a $20 million cash shortfall year to date, then it's actually $20,900,000 and $59,000 more when you go from an actual cash basis. And you know, my question is, I mean, just what is the cash reality versus the projection reality, you know, throughout the whole budget? It's just a concern for me. I wanted to just state it for the record.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so except for 17 and 18, we're done with the university. Okay. Chapter 2, Part 3, the Guam Community College. Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much again. Mr. Speaker, I have the same comment basically that I'd like to provide as well for GCC, who's been really towing the line as well in terms of its expenditures and how they've been able to actually go out and, you know, bring monies into their institution without burdening the government in terms of facilities. And I have to say that it's a very conservative increase that the college will be getting. It's only really slightly above $100,000. So, and I thank her and I thank you as well. and of course, everyone at the college who's towed the line as well to stay within their means. And unfortunately, I know with the $10 million that they have not received in this particular fiscal budget, I'm hoping that they'll get it. And I know that I've asked how were they surviving, and it gotten to the point where the president had to get authorization from the board to actually consider some of the monies that they themselves had authorized her to use that's really not part of their appropriation to be able to meet the college's needs. So I thank you again, Mr. Chairman.
As I understand it, there is a payment agreement between UOG and DOA, GCC and DOA, on a payment plan on how much they're going to be receiving to pay down the 20 and the 10. And we just got confirmation that the amount that is still pending for GDOE is 18. The Section 1 on Part 3, legislative intent. On the appropriation of $17,903,000 for the operation of GCC. Appropriation of $835,000 to the GCC licensed practical nurse and vocational guidance programs. Appropriation to the ProStart. D, appropriation to the GCC apprenticeship program.
Mr. Chairman, I know that there is an increase from last year, which is from $879 to $1 million, and we've been hearing, of course, about some applications that have been rejected. I think they said 90% of all applications for H2 workers, and this, definitely, will impact GCC. But I'd just like to let you know that I'm really appreciative of the fact that we're able to at least continue to address this in spite of what is going on the federal side, of course, of not approving, monies for the Manpower Development Fund. For the
And those of you
apprenticeship
that
program.
attended the hearing on labor heard the Department of Labor insist that that the amount would be collected before the end of the next fiscal year. The federal grants and aid, $1,053,113. GCC Capital Improvement Fund appropriation of $278,000. These are for several buildings, and just so that Senator Espaldon, because I told him I recognize him if he, okay?
I'm sorry, Speaker.
First Generation Trust Fund, the GCC's contribution to it.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just so that for informational purposes, so the total amount adds up. There's 200 from GCC, 250 from the University of Guam, and then 100 from DOE. So the total allocation for this upcoming fiscal year would be the additive number.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Section 5, the reports. Section 6, the continuing appropriation. Again, we'll
Again.
bookmark that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, if I may ask a question. You know, it says the unexpended balance. If it has been encumbered, is that considered an expended balance?
If it's encumbered, it can be
But
expended.
it has not been
But
paid.
if it hasn't been encumbered yet, if it's unencumbered, it would lapse. But if it's somehow been committed and encumbered to something, they can get the money later to pay for it.
Okay.
So they will make some commitments, and some of it will not be ever expended. So I never know how much of this 10 million is going to be.
Okay. And this is one of those issues that are being thrown into
Correct.
the mix. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, wouldn't it be considered prior year obligation if it's encumbered and the payment is not made before the end of the new fiscal year? Then that's how we get the definition of a prior year obligation, right? Because it wouldn't have been an obligation unless it's been encumbered, and unless at the time someone certified that the cash was there, but for some reason the cash wasn't there, and so the clock ran out on that fiscal year, you would treat it as a prior year obligation. And that's why throughout this budget, in certain instances, we have an automatic authorization for prior year obligations.
Yeah.
I believe that's how
This
it's treated.
continuing appropriation allows
No,
to
I was just
continue
trying.
to carry over the
I was just trying to
unencumbered
respond to
ones.
Senator Espaldon's question. What happens if it's encumbered and it's the start of the new fiscal year? How is that treated?
It would not be a continuing appropriation, you're correct, it would be prior.
Okay.
It would be prior year, but if they, of the 10 million, if they encumber nine of it and don't spend the one, they can still carry that one over.
Yeah, of course.
And the question really centered around the word unexpended balance. I understand the prior year obligation and whatnot. An unexpended balance shall not lapse and should be available for GC for expenditures in fiscal 2017. So is that $10 where
Yeah.
the example I gave you?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'll mark that, and we'll try to get an answer tonight from everybody. Chapter 2, Part 4, the Commission on Educator Certification, an appropriation of $281,822.
May I?
Madam Chair.
I know that this is the status quo, of course, from last year, and there really is a need. I don't know how we're going to do this because of the most recent legislation that was passed in terms of the ethics law, that there would be a need possibly for either legal assistance. And I'd like to probably discuss that with you later, maybe when we get to the Attorney General's office, and how they'll be able to provide those type of services for some of these boards and commissions, such as the Guahan Council, the Charter School Council, and also the Certification Commission. So.
Okay, if we're going to leave that open, and in light of the hour, would there be a major objection to recessing at this time? Well, everybody's awake. No. Okay. We're recessed until 9 tomorrow morning, please. Thank you, everybody.